everybody, Mike Piper here with Piper Hobby Supply today. I'm going to try and do a demonstration on putting a Digitrax decoder in the new Kato E5 and show you how I put decoders in. It's pretty much the same way for all the Kato locomotives, the way I do it, and let's take a look at it. Okay, we're going to start out here by opening up the package of the new DN163 KOE, which is the decoder that goes in the E5. So let's pop it open and I'll show you step for step how I do it. I take the staples out with a knife here, and I put them on a magnet so I don't keep losing them in the trash can. There's the decoder. Doesn't look much different than some of the others. Right now we're not going to need the kapton tape at this very moment, so I'm going to pull it off the board, and I have a light up here. I'm going to stick it to the arm of the light just to keep it out of the way. So there's our decoder. Let's get this locomotive out. I have not seen the inside of one of these yet. Use a standard procedure of pulling the shell open, giving it a little shake, and the shell comes right off. Okay? Now, when I get to this point here, I pop out the little gray holder, which it tells you to do in the instructions. And basically, you slide the board forward because there's a little tab right here that holds the back of the decoder down. Now, the next thing I do is I bend the motor tabs up. I take a Sharpie, a thin Sharpie, and I mark where the motor tabs contact the contact strips from the axles, so that when I remove these, I'll know where to put the kapton tape. Also, one other step I do is I mark the right hand and the left hand of the locomotive, so that, because what happens is you fold the kapton tape around this this piece of metal here, and instead of looping it around several times, I only fold it over once and back, and I cut it along the inside edge. If you cut along the inside edge and put that piece over here, your motor tab can make contact with the board. So I always want to make sure which one goes on which side, and which side actually has the fold of the kapton tape on it. So now I'm going to pull these out. I'm going to get my scissors here, and we're going to cut a little piece of kapton tape. And I'm hoping you can see this. See the markers on there. I'm going to put a little piece of kapton tape over there and fold it over, as this is the left hand side. And then I'm just going to trim. I trim right up against the metal. Now I've got a piece of kapton tape that's folded from this side around to the back side, so that one's going to have to go on this side over here. Another piece of kapton tape. The one that I've marked right hand, I'm going to put the kapton tape on here, fold it over, and you'll notice that I fold it over real tight against the edge here. There's a purpose for that, and I'll show you in a minute. And let's trim this off right even with the board, or the strip. Now, on this particular model, the strips are long enough that I'm going to reinsert them back on the back in the chassis. And there's an alignment pin right here in the center. And I'm going to stick it on the alignment pin, and then I'm going to push that down in there. There's a little strip right down in there that also holds this metal strip in conjunction with the pin there. And by doing that, it kind of locks this in place. And I'm going to do the same thing with the left hand one. Find the alignment pin, and push it back down in there. Now you can see that I've segregated the strips from the motor tabs. Now what we're going to do is set that back out of the way here a little bit, and I'm going to take the decoder upside down. I've already got my soldering iron hot, and those of you who are intimidated by soldering, I have a video that I posted recently on soldering. Every time I do any kind of decoder install, or if you have access, I always save all my extra wire. It doesn't matter what color it is. But what we're going to do here is we're going to cut a couple of about 1 to 1.5 inch strips of this real thin, I think it's about 30 gauge wire. And I save all my pieces. And I'm going to grab the end of this little piece of wire and just strip just a little tiny bit there off the end. I don't know if you can see that. We're going to do the other one. Now I'm going to get my solder down and my flux, and I'm going to put a dab of flux on the end of each one of these wires. Just a dab. You don't need to overdo it. Also, right down here on the end of this board, the very end, the back end, where there is no LED, I'm going to put just a dab of flux there as well. And I'll show you in a minute where this is all leading. I'm going to get my iron here, and I hope you're going to be able to see this. I'm going to put the wire, hold on a minute, let me see if I can do this with some tweezers so that you guys can actually, I'm not in the way of the camera, hopefully. I'm going to hold that end of that wire right down on that flux that I put on there, and we're just going to touch this just with a tiny bit of solder. And you can see now that I've soldered that small 30 gauge wire to one side of the decoder. And like I say, color of the wire is irrelevant as long as you keep track of which one you're going to solder here, and I'll show you. Do the same thing to the opposite side. Get a little bit of solder here. Okay. Now I hope you can see that. I've got two small, about 30 gauge wires soldered to the back of the board. What this is going to do is we're going to solder these. When I install this decoder, we're going to solder these to the strip down back here in the back. That's going to make a physical connection from those strips to this board, so we don't have to rely on the board just sitting on those contact strips. It just eliminates another possible case of trouble. So let me even up the ends of these little wires, and I'm going to do the same thing we did before. I'm going to just strip a little tiny bit here. And I don't know again if you can see that. Just a little tiny bit. Now I'm going to see exactly, or approximately, not exactly, but approximately where this board's going to fit, because I haven't done one of these. I just want to make sure. Okay, you can see that we have plenty of space back here, and what we're going to do, and I'll use the tweezers, is we're going to take these 30 gauge wires and we're going to solder them to this strip right about in here. I'll pull the decoder up, I'll show you here, and we're going to solder them right to the strips. Once again, we're going to put a little bit of flux, just a little bit on the ends of the wire, and one little dab right about there. And every locomotive is a little bit different, so you kind of have to measure where your wire is going to reach to. Now, since the decoder fits like this, obviously the wires are going to fit with this wire on the right-hand side, this wire on the left-hand side. And what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to hold the decoder in place. We don't have to have it perfect or anything, and I'm just going to make the solder connection to the strip. quick touch of the soldering iron. Now I've got it soldered to the strip. I'll show you a picture here in a minute, or I'll get the camera a little bit closer so you'll be able to see. Now on my other side. Now I have both sides soldered to the strips. In effect, the decoder is hardwired to our strips now. Now I'm going to take the slack that I have in these little wires, and I'm just going to bend it to the inside. Push this board. Once I get the motor tabs to the side, slip the decoder down approximately where it's going to be, which I have it a little bit further back than where it needs to be. Now you can see this tab here in the back is in its hole, and I'm just going to slide it back underneath that tab, and now in effect your decoder is more or less in place where it needs to be. Now what I have to do is I'm going to bend these motor tabs down to the board, but first things first, I'm going to put a little bit of flux on those, because I know there's going to be guys that are going to chastise me about soldering these, but I've had so many not make connection that that's the way it is, and this is the way I do it. I haven't had any problems with them soldered, but I've had problems with them not soldered. So we're going to solder. Let me find my X-Acto knife here, and generally, or usually what I do is I will just take and hold this motor tab down on the board, get my solder on my iron, just a slight bit, just enough to hold that tab down. We don't want to get too much solder on there, or we won't be able to get our little gray piece back in there. Now that little gray piece isn't necessarily needed, but the customer, it's part of the locomotive and it belongs with the locomotive, so I put it back in there. Now you can see that both of those tabs are soldered to the board, so now we have a physical connection from the strip and a physical connection to the motor. So if this decoder operates, which it should, I don't have very many problems with Digitrax decoders, we should be able to take this out now and run it. So let me put this clip back in where it goes, and you will see that it pretty much looks exactly like the original board. One thing that I did not do is I noticed on the old board is that they bend the headlight down so that it can be picked up by the headlight board. So we're going to take my tweezers and we're going to, maybe with these tweezers, make a little bend in it, downward bend in it, like so. Now let's go out here and see if it runs. Okay, here we are at our test bench. Here's our locomotive. Decoder installed. I'm going to put it on the track here. I'm going to hit, as you can see, I have a Digitrax, an old Digitrax Zephyr here that I use for testing purposes in my little test loop. I'm going to hit the power on. And obviously last time I had put a locomotive on the track, I had set the throttle up to a little bit higher and left it there before I turned the power off. But you can see now that we have a functioning locomotive. Headlight off, headlight on. Let's try reverse. We have reverse. Back to forward. We have forward. And we have very good low speed control. We'll run it all the way around the loop a couple of times just to be sure everything's good. Now, one thing I like to do before I leave the test bench here is go ahead and put the shell on. So let me go get the shell, put it on, and we'll make sure it still runs once the shell's installed. Okay, here we are back at our test bench. I have the shell on our E5. Let's see what happens. It appears like it runs fine with the shell on. Let's try reverse. It looks like it runs good. Okay, everybody, here we are back with our E5. The install seemed to be successful, and that's pretty much how I install any of them that have a board on top. I always use the wire to make a physical connection to the power strips, and always make a physical connection to the motor. I hope you guys can find this beneficial, and I'll talk to you next time. This is Mike from Pfeiffer Hobby Supply. I'll talk to you later. Bye-bye.